in some of my own courses, I teach that if you are fully present, you will always have more than enough time, because we keep saying we don't have enough time. But it's because we waste it. Like we throw it away, leaving the present in order to worry about what's happened or what's going to happen.
Exactly.
But if I'm here now, it's often more than enough time. It feels like just the right amount of time, because of that being authentic and understanding who I am, becoming a friend to myself so that I can be a friend to the world, and settling.
It's so great to talk to you, John.
Good to meet you too. Yeah.
Yeah,
So are you in Germany?
I'm in Vienna.
Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah. And you are in the beautiful South Africa.
I'm in Durban at the moment, but I live in Johannesburg.
Wow. Well, it's my home country, so I'm always so happy to talk to South Africans. Yeah.
Cool. Super. Well, thanks for asking me.
It's a great pleasure. You're a comedian in South Africa, stand-up comedian.
So I was for about 25 years and had a great time, but I gave it up and I decided to pursue some other things. Academics is one of them, and just build my business. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. Maybe more studies and my work here.
But originally you're from Zimbabwe.
Yes, I was born in a very small town called Marandellas, which is now called Marondera, and my parents moved briefly to Harare in the 80s, and then my mum is South African, so we came to South Africa. My dad's a Zimbabwean, and we came back to South Africa in, I think, around 1981.
Oh, okay.
I was quite small. Yeah, yeah.
And
but I grew up in Durban, and then I moved to Joburg about 30 years ago for work.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you grew up in Durban, which is a beautiful part of South Africa as well. We used to go on holiday there.
It is lovely. It's actually raining, and we're at the coast. It's so lush and humid, and everything is just so green. It's beautiful. Yeah.
What part of the coastline do you live?
So we lived in Durban centrally. At the moment, we're up a little bit north, Mhlanga. I just bought my mum. My mum recently moved from Durban to come and live in Johannesburg, and she missed some of her friends and family. So I brought her down just to get a bit of a recharge on the battery.
But it's always so beautiful down there. But I first want to talk about your comedy. Your career as a stand-up comedian. I also read that you were the first South African who won the award for best stand-up.
Yeah. Yes, it was never a comedy award, and then someone started the South African Comedy Awards. They went bang after 2 years, but I won the first one, which was quite cool. I've won award my whole life, but I won that. So I liked. I gravitated towards dark comedy, quite shocking, social taboos, lots of rude topics, things people didn't really discuss in polite company. I loved that stuff, and I always thought that I didn't quite understand the shock aspect of comedy. But I did spend a bit of time with some heroes. Peter Dirk Ace was a massive influence for me. He understood the value of dark comedy and his satire because he took real risks. I was kind of really in an era when there was no real danger of speaking freely. In his kind of beginnings, it was truly dangerous. And he wrote, literary level satire. I mean, I never got to that level, but I always enjoyed dark humor that kind of challenged social norms and politeness, because I always felt that there was some kind of menace in politeness and conservatism, and blowing open those kind of cells, I think, of respectability was quite good, particularly, in an era when sort of polite society was so immoral in terms of, kind of race politics and discrimination. I always felt there was this kind of brute grotesqueness to civil society in those days. I suppose the definition's changed now. Civil society is more kind of woke and activist. But in those days, what was kind of seen as polite society was quite evil.
Yeah, but isn't it almost the duty of comedy, I would say, to go into those places? Even like you say now, in all aspects of society, the more liberal and the more conservative. I find that comedians really go and get something out there that make us think.
I really hope so. I've watched comedy go from being the jester who talks to the king, tells truth to power, often using kind of blunt instruments sometimes scalpels. Um, but there's been a tendency in the recent past for the comedian to forget themselves and think that they are the king. And that I found quite disturbing when comedians become, social oracles and gurus. Then I think there's an imbalance. Something's wrong. But what makes the jester so kind of intriguing is that at any moment they can lose their head to power. They can get killed for what they say, and they constantly take those risks. But then recently, there have been more sort of powerful forces in the comedy world where these kind of binary armies are forming. You see it around lots of stuff. Dave Chappelle, there was a lot of that stuff around him. I find a lot of his more recent commentary quite sort of um, empty of comedy. And I think that's wrong. We've seen a lot of this kind of binary stuff around Jordan Peterson, not doing comedy, but turning psychology into a kind of arena spectator sport, which has been interesting. And social influencers with no real academic rigor or research behind them, just becoming a mouthpiece and thinking that they are the king. And I think there's a problem with that when we forget that we're not in charge. We just it's that punching up that makes it interesting. So the weak speaking up against the odds, against power. But if you become the power,
I understand what you mean. Yeah, I've never
yeah,
thought of that, but yeah, I do understand what you mean. But for you as a South African, and I also see that you toured the world, and you've always also in the UK performed at the famous Hammersmith Apollo, that I know of is very famous for the comedy stand-ups. So was it easy for you to break into this industry in the international comedy industry?
Well, I mean, whether I ever broke into the international industry is probably debatable. I think I managed to wangle my way into a few places. I can't remember which the venue was. It was one of the West End venues. It may have been the Hammersmith Apollo, but we played the Royal Albert Hall, played the Sydney Museum of Modern Art, the Tempodrome in Berlin. But these are all one-offs. I mean, now there are comedians who play them regularly and play the Montreal Festival 4 or 5 times. Um, there wasn't a lot of interest in comedy from South Africa, but I think that was normal because it took quite a while for Australian comedians to get onto the kind of global circuit, for British comedians to play the US, for New Zealand comedians now having quite a big kind of, you know, there's a lot of excitement around that. I think Trevor Noah probably did more for South African comedy than anyone. Even Peter Dirk Ace, I always thought he was a legend, but the kind of massive commercial appeal of South African comedy is only really after Trevor Noah kind of got onto the Daily Show and blew it open. So I had fun, but what I did find was that I tried in the beginning to be an international comedian and work the room, but that was okay. When it's really started to kind of work was to be as authentic a South African as possible in front of international audiences. So we started by playing sort of diasporic crowds, so lots of South African audiences who were homesick. But then we
Oh yeah.
realized there was a very small limit to what we could do with that. Playing an Australian audience to Australians being authentically South African was quite interesting, and perhaps the same with UK audiences.
But what do you think about, so if you say authentically South Africa, do you think somebody has to know something about South Africa to understand the humor? Or do you think it
Um,
can be universal?
I think all humor is universal. It's only the screensaver that really makes it different. You know, this is a term we use a lot. I had a friend who was telling me how his sexuality was just a screensaver. He had no idea why people were so, so hung up on this label. So I think ultimately great comedy deals with universal themes, but we flavor it by being authentic from where we come. So I think trying to communicate the South African experience, I think what people find compelling is the stuff they find in common
Oh,
in a
yeah.
different flavor. If you
Mm.
imagine, so, we live in an age of flavors where, coffee is no longer coffee flavored. It's got all kinds of nonsense in it, or, gin, or, we've crossed flavors. So I think bringing people a human who's got a slightly different dressing is quite interesting. And I think people were interested to know what was going on here because there was a very limited view of what the South African reality was. And I think for a long time it was seen as sort of white bad, black good, this kind of struggle for equality and democracy and oppression and this refusal to let go of power and this enormous injustice. So it was quite a often when I traveled, I would find quite a limited view of what was going on here. And obviously when I was, I mean, not obviously, but when I was starting comedy in the 90s, we were just emerging from that.
Oh, yeah.
So I would imagine, people kind of journalists wrote about this group of young comedians who were kind of emerging from the kind of birth of democracy. And so I was just lucky to be in that kind of, in that group. But I remember growing up and admiring misogynist, racist material by the handful of comedians that were kind of getting all the airtime, um, because that's what it was. And I'm luckily I'm in my 50s, so I don't really care too much about what people make of what I'm saying here about admiring those comedians. But it's the truth.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of my life has been around unpicking the wiring that I grew up with, and just admitting to it because it's so much easier. So I
Yeah.
watched maybe 5 or 6 comedians. There were some conscious comedians. Peter Dirk was a massive one. He was against the grain. Many of the others will say now that they were kind of anti-apartheid, but the truth is, even I at the beginning worked the room. So we played essentially an all-white, mostly male audience in most venues. It was only over time that I watched women become part of the mix. Black people joined the mix as the middle class blossomed. I started to see audiences change and transform, and so from the beginning, I mean, I watched that. Let's call it like a right wing audience, kind of mature and grow and become representative, and now it's just this beautiful kind of representative
Amazing.
audience. Yeah,
Mm. And you talk about Peter Dirk, as I remember also as a child, and of course he poked also at the things that I think South Africans didn't want to hear or didn't want to see of themselves. And
mm,
um, I think this is so valuable that comedians do that, that they poke and that they
yeah,
make us look at ourselves and really laugh at ourselves because it's sometimes ridiculous, the things
yeah.
that we do.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think it's one of the most palatable ways to have a difficult conversation or reflection if
Mhm.
we dress it in humor. And there's something to be said for shock. Um, I did some work with a well-known lawyer in South Africa on collecting some material to try and oppose the rewriting of the hate speech bill some years ago. And in that kind of experience, I read up on uh, almost every progressive constitution around the world, and sometimes in liberal constitutions, the right of art to shock, offend, and disturb is enshrined. And so, because great constitutions recognize the social value of shock, offense, and disturbance um, in social progress, because back to that politeness I was talking about, if we allow politeness to determine um, our behavior as a society, we very seldom have hard conversations. So we
Exactly.
raise children that are in they're not resilient, and we are not resilient, and it's normally because our beliefs are brittle. So it's often a religious dogma, or it's a very primitive racial narrative that we are trying to protect or perpetuate. And the only way to protect something which doesn't stand up to scrutiny is to become very sensitive to it. So we don't discuss it. It's not discussed. And so comedy hopefully breaks those conversations open, and it lasts beyond the show. So you might discuss it in the car on the way home. You might bring it to the dinner table the next time you gather, or, oh, you know what I heard? And then there's like
Yeah.
so hopefully that happens. But I'm also very open about the fact that when I look at records of my old work, I definitely played the stereotypical cards in order to get laughs. And I'm not very proud of that.
Well, I think it's absolutely true what you're saying, and I think it makes, like you also say, it's the makes society look at themselves, and sort of be critical, but the humor actually makes you do it in a way.
Hmm. Yeah, I think humor works in the classroom. It works in a working environment. I think it works in a social dialogue environment. And also, I've watched how it bonds people. People who laugh together form a connection
Absolutely.
for
Mm.
that time. And so I think there's a lot of value to it. And even though I don't do it anymore, I'm glad there are people who do it, and there are lots of young comedians who are trying different things. And as the world evolves, I have a daughter who's 23, so she's in a different kind of. Perhaps we would have drifted apart when she was younger, a little bit in the way that she was experiencing the world. She's a little bit closer to me now in the way that we see things generationally. But there are people younger than her who are doing comedy that I may not even fully understand or appreciate, but I think they're doing the same work, and it's fresh. So that's good.
Mm. But what made you step out of comedy? What made you make the transition?
Um, so I would probably say realizing that I had some mental health stuff that I had to work on, and I have a history of addiction, so alcoholism, drug addiction. I have an eating disorder, which I'm kind of addressing. And those things, when you get into that stuff, you start to understand it's not about the substances, it's not about the food or the booze. I can never drink again. I can never take drugs again. I have to watch the way that I eat, but it's the patterns of behavior. And I will say that it's not comedy, but it's attention. If you have a disordered way of perceiving the world, I think that attention can be really dangerous. And I think you get certain allowances and indulgences. You can. I'm not saying everyone does this because not everyone is like me. Not everyone's disordered, but by growing up as a sort of an addict, sort of as an addict, I didn't process things properly. I avoided processing. I'm going to speak in kind of really general terms because I've
Yeah.
spent a lot of time on this. I summarize it, but essentially for me, growing up as an escape artist, so as a kid, I would bend the truth. I would exaggerate, or I would kind of just to impress people. There was a deficit, so I had to try and fill it in a way that it wasn't very diligent. So I found ways to avoid feeling less than, feeling, because I think some kids deal with it, from the beginning. They have the tools, and they find the tools, and they make the effort, and I just avoided. So it was almost a natural progression for me to become a show off in a way professionally. It's wonderful to be able to go into a room and just blurb, and then people think it's lovely, and things just happen.
Yeah.
So I put it all off, and then I had some social anxiety, and I had things that I believe come from not processing emotions as a growing human. Um, let's call it an overdraft. It's like an emotional overdraft. So that overdraft builds, and that creates some kind of discontentment or a discomfort. And then it's easy to drink something, when you find that
Oh, yeah.
substance, you can drink and it just lubricates everything. And then the problem with that is it's quite messy, because if you drink too much, you obviously fall down, you become sick, you can see that that person is under the influence. So there's other substances, and you can take those, and that can lift you up. So you can sustain your drinking. There are ways to, do it. If you have a little bit of celebrity, people will offer it to you. So it becomes almost part of the furniture. And what happened to me was just became worse and worse, because I was now really not dealing with stuff. And now I had a license to behave badly. So I think I treated people badly. And I think if you continuously treat people badly, because every human being is conscious, every human being is aware of things on a real level. So the guilt and the shame of doing it and doing nothing about it, it's a strange dynamic, because it almost like positions you as a victim. I had some problems in my childhood. I mean, I was abused, and things happened, but there are so many people who go through the same thing, and they don't deal with it in the same way that I did.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
can't blame those things. Not my fault. Terrible things happen, but my responsibility. Um, so at quite a late age in my life, I came to a crisis point where I realized that I just wasn't doing the work that I should, and as a result, people around me were getting harmed. I wasn't feeling good about myself. So I met someone who was very kind, ultimately, to me, and um, suggested that I go and get help. So I did, and as a result of that, I felt like I've done enough with the attention. Now I'd like to turn to education, develop what I've accumulated in terms of experience over the last few decades, and see if there is a way that, number one, I can heal, I can take responsibility for myself, and become a better person to the people around me, and perhaps myself. And then but the other thing is, I've spent a lot of years talking to strangers and trying to put them into one connected group called an audience.
Oh, yeah.
So could I maybe combine education, research, and start to maybe give back some of that information in a more structured way, more than a show? Because you come to a show, you connect, you laugh together, and you go home, and then you don't really, that's the end of that. I suppose it has a value, but what if I could start to teach my experience plus research on how people connect and stay in community? So I studied, and I did a thesis on this idea of, why is it that I've experienced in all my years of taking briefs as a comedian, because I did lots of corporate comedy, a broken relationship between particularly Black talent and white power in the South African boardroom. So I went to investigate that, and it was a hunch, but I'm quite good at um, reading the room.
Oh,
so
yeah. Of course. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
So, number one, it was confirmed that there's very little trust. In fact, zero in my interviews sample that I did. Zero trust between those two parties, and then I started to investigate why. And what we got to was, because I say we, because I really worked with the people I interviewed. I did quite a lot of interviews, but I had a collaborative approach. Um, a lot of work hasn't been done between identities in South Africa, and there's an identity crisis, because everyone had a very set place in the previous power structures of this country for decades, and those were flipped almost overnight, and that creates a crisis for people. They don't know where they fit in, and so as we all discover um, who we really are, so you can see there's a mirror here with my own life, and
Yeah.
and this.
Absolutely.
So I've started to understand that who we are, how we constructed our social construct, determines absolutely how we see the world. And we see the same reality differently based on our social constructs. Um, And so part of the problem is we all see a different version of the truth and we insist on it because we live in a time where the self is being given sovereignty. Even now, we live in a
Absolutely.
time where your identity takes precedence over everything else. And that's a little bit out of balance because
I
while
agree.
we do need the self, it's important to have rights and safety and welfare in order to build trust. We also need to understand that the social contract, the reason why we gather, is important. And if we don't look after that, there's nowhere for ourselves to be safe. So um, that's kind of where my work is now, is in this kind of interesting realm of um, the dance between what the self is, how it's been put together, and how important it is compared to the glue that holds us together as social creatures. Um, and so that's kind of what my next study is going to be about, which is how do
Amazing.
I best how do I best play um, within a healthy social contract.
Well, that's wonderful, and all these what they call transferable skills that you gained from, and the knowledge, and reading the room, like you say, that you did with your comedy, that you now can have more insight into how groups work together.
Mm, absolutely. I think people think that diversity is a moral, not even moral, it's a corporate obligation. And all over the world, diversity is being attacked as being pointless but the truth is that that's not the point of diversity. It's not to give others a chance. It's if you allow more of someone's identity to come in to a healthy social contract. So that could be a society, it could be a work culture, it could be, doesn't matter. If more of that person is welcome in that environment, you're going to get more from them. And the truth is that Petra has a collection of experiences that I don't have. So if I welcome more of you into a connection with me where we are going to come up with solutions, the more of you that feels welcome in this environment. So you must have a say in how we design the culture, how we incentivize, how we recognize the various parts of people. So if I allow your social construct, how you were, I genuinely want to know, where were you from? What formed you? How do you see the world? When we get to a problem, not only can I throw my experience at it, but now we have all of you as well. So you are throwing all of
Exactly.
Petra at the problem, and I'm allowing that to happen. But what that requires is that I've got to get my ego just to shut up for a minute while you occupy the space. And you must feel welcome, and you must feel that there's space held for you, and that it's non-judgmental, because often I will only judge you based on prejudice that I've been programmed with as a result of my and my forebearers' experience of the world, which didn't include you. So now I'm subjecting your social construct to my experience, and that's a very strange limiter. So now what I'm trying to show clients is that the more diverse your team is, if you listen and you create elastic space for them, you will become a container of so much potential innovation, potential problem solving. It's got nothing to do with what the government says you must do with DEI. It's got to do with how good do you want this team to be? Because then, if more of Petra is allowed to come to work, you won't find work so exhausting because you don't have to pretend, which is takes up most of your
Exactly.
energy.
Yeah, that's
So the
absolutely
result of that
true.
is you go home more whole. So you
Yeah.
give more to your family, and your family will be grateful. They'll recharge your batteries, and you'll come back to work more whole. So it's a really good engine for yeah.
Yeah, I can absolutely testify that for me, uh, by just listening to people and their stories, and I've done many interviews, um, it changed my life because I hear stories, I hear how people see the world, how they see art, how they explore their uh, specific form of art. And I must say, it also then makes me look at their art in a different way. So there's certain things certain forms of art that I didn't know anything about. And after listening to what the artists say or talk about, or how they started doing it, whatever the story, makes me just look completely differently to that form of art. And it's true what you're saying. It's that listening, or that opening up to somebody else's story, and not, like you say, trying to always put your story out, or your own ideas, but then also opening up to somebody else.
Yeah.
This is amazing work that you're doing.
Well, I hope so. It's ongoing and it's early. I work with some nice big organizations who it takes time for them to trust me, because I don't look like your average corporate human being. But
that's good.
Well, it begins the process, because them realizing that maybe there's something I could offer is the beginning of the end of that particular prejudice breaking down. So there's a reason why I've tattooed my hands in particular. Sometimes I wear nail polish because I like it. And what I try and encourage people to do is have the experience, forget what I'm saying, analyze what comes up in them when they sit and listen and look at me, and wonder where those prejudices come from. So honor them. And this is very much a Buddhist idea, which is, instead of judging others, become an observer of my own reactions to the world. So non-judgment is not just about others, but it's about my own reaction. So if I judge it, I'm trying to shut it down or alter it. If I just remain observant of my own reaction to the world, and it's very difficult sometimes. I mean, this is why I think people study Buddhism for many, many years. But I have all the information I need inside myself. I can just watch my own reaction, and it still happens because I'm wired from birth, basically, to react a certain way. And it's all based on a bunch of, I think my parents wanted the best for me. Ultimately, I can criticize the way that they might have done things, or my grandparents, but ultimately they were doing the best they could with kind of what they had. And I do the same. I recognize in myself certain, let's call them, I suppose, biases that my daughter doesn't have, or she has less of. And observing my own, because that's the other thing is, in comedy, people used to say to me, you go to Germany, so you go to Berlin to a comedy festival, and how do you relate to the audience? And in the beginning, I used to try and become an international comedian by learning about Berlin. But the truth is, it's the same old crap, because I'll get there and I'll make a joke about a food that everyone makes a joke about. I'll make a joke about a building, or a behavior, so people come to South Africa and they say, oh, you sell things at the traffic lights. Like, it's this hilarious joke. But it's the same old stupid comment. It doesn't make you more German, for me to go to Berlin and talk about a particular food, or point out the difference between Bavarian stereotypes and, other German. Do you know what I mean? It's the same surface level. If I observe myself as a human being, I start to understand that actually you probably woke up this morning. You probably got out of bed. You probably had a warm beverage of some kind, or maybe a cold beverage. You did some kind of morning routine. You probably washed, you've got dressed. Suddenly I've got this huge list of things that I have in common with you, which have got nothing to do with who's living where, or,
That's
so becoming more familiar with myself has been the biggest part of my journey in understanding other people, because I can actually resonate with people if I just be quiet and listen inwardly, and observe. So yes, I suppose I observe other people, but the secret to working a room is observing how I'm feeling, because the truth is, I'm probably resonating with everyone else. So if I go inward, I'm kind of learning how to connect outwardly.
But here you're touching something that actually has been quite a theme over the past few months in the interviews where I've spoken to singer-songwriters or to composers, creators, where they talk about being their authentic self and writing from their authentic self, writing really from within. And then also realizing that the audience, if they had that experience or that emotion, that somebody else will also have that emotion and then would be able to relate to the music or the song or the lyrics or whatever. And also that idea of, I'm not impressed, I'm not trying to win everybody over. I'm really trying to touch somebody, and this is also what you're talking about now. I think it's that authentic self, that connecting, that thinking that if I am this person, there's somebody else that I can connect with.
100%. I think that's ultimately, I think all of this is about the fact that all I want to do is be present as much as possible for whatever time I have, as opposed to never being present, always wanting more, because that's the monster, right? That's the, whether it's booze, drugs, attention, money, fame, it's just never enough. And there are two things. One is the Buddha said, if we take care of each moment, we take care of all time. And I live by that now. I try to. And the other one is, in some of my own courses, I teach that if you are fully present, you will always have more than enough time, because we keep saying we don't have enough time. But it's because we waste it. Like, we throw it away, leaving the present in order to worry about what's happened or what's going to happen.
Exactly.
But if I'm here now, it's often more than enough time. It feels like just the right amount of time, because of that being authentic and understanding who I am, becoming a friend to myself so that I can be a friend to the world, and settling. And then often, when I talk to people and I just get present, often when I work with leaders on a one-to-one basis, it used to be so anxious for me because I was the consultant, and now I've got to be like an expert in every moment. Now I'm not an expert. I'm just present, and I see what comes up, and I won't speak unless something worth talking about comes up that feels true, which means more silence, and that's not always comfortable.
But I think it's also that idea of fame or chasing something or trying to get somewhere. That's the part of being uneasy in yourself, that you were talking about when you were a comedian. And I read this book, Seth Godin, he's a marketer in America, and he talks about not being for everyone. You're not for everyone. What you do is not for everyone. And if you can make peace with that, then of course you can spend more time in that space, where you think, okay, well, I'm creating or I'm doing, but it doesn't matter if I'm not known to everybody or if I'm not everybody's cup of tea.
Yeah. I think a big life is a little bit thin. A small, rich life, a deep life is cool. That's the thing I realize now, is a present life is the best that I think I can hope for, yeah.
Well, I think what you're doing definitely in the corporate world is also so important, because I think it's also that that idea that you spend so much time in the office or in the workplace or, in this community of people, that really it's so important what you're doing, that you try to find that place where everybody else belongs, that they feel, okay, this is where what I'm doing is important, or it has a valuable thing in this community of people working together.
I just think we're missing a lot of connection, because I don't think it matters whether you're with your partner or your child or your friend or someone you consider to be difficult. In fact, even more so sometimes. Because if you find someone where there's a power imbalance, often in Buddhism they say, um, if I can remember that the people who challenge me are my holy teachers or holy
Okay.
guides, and with diversity, often what we are fighting is not the connection or the person. We're fighting the narrative in our own heads. I think Yuval Harari said a beautiful thing recently. He said, we don't go to war over resources anymore. We go to war over stories in our heads. And
True.
thought that was a beautiful description of not only geopolitics, but also corporate environments. We have conflicts with concepts that in our heads, it's not the other person. So,
That's true. No, that's
and if
true.
I imagine they've got a concept in their head, our concepts are fighting. We're not even
Yeah.
involved, but it feels like war. And
Mm.
and so yeah, I think we shouldn't waste so much time waiting to get home from work because we are alive the whole time. And
Exactly. Yeah.
if we practice being present at work, we can go home present.
Mm. Well, your company is called OGO, if I'm right. What does
Ogo.
that?
Yeah.
Okay. What does that stand
Yeah.
for?
It's quite rude. So so we were joking one day. We were wondering what to call our business, and we liked the idea of sounding like an app. Something simple, something could work anywhere without any real reference.
Mm.
And we were thinking about when we taking quite a complicated brief or we're trying to solve a lot of problems, and the client goes, I studied drama, or I did this, and I think we should, and we go, oh, go, and then we say something quite rude. Um,
I
um,
always see.
but but so we started laughing, and before we knew it, that's the name we registered, and
I love it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Ogo really was. I studied drama with a friend of mine many decades ago in Natal, and we stayed in touch. And my business partner Belinda, who goes by the name B, um, she went on to become one of the biggest producers of the sort of show callers and sort of budget experts and stuff. I never know what to call her because there are official titles, but she really is a very multi-talented human being. And I was always presenting, and then I started a production side to my comedy agency, and we were producing a lot of TV specials and stuff like that, doing sponsorship deals. And we just ended up backstage so many times. She was sort of running the show for someone else. I was either designing or hosting. And we said, we should just do this for ourselves. And so we did, and it worked. And then over time, as this works developed, because I was often the MC and did comedy and all of that at the show, lots of creative stuff. But we took in a third partner, Loazi, and Loazi is also very creative. So I've moved away from that into strategy for our clients. So now instead of just doing a production, we say, well, what is the beginning state of this audience? Where do we find them? Whether it's a leadership conference or an incentive or a awards dinner, tell us who these people are now and who would you like us to make them, how would you like us to make them look or think or feel at the end? And then I have a job, which is how do we change their mindset or behavior from the beginning of engagement, which will be pre-event comms, through the event, whether it's a 2-day conference, a 3-day conference, a one-night thing, and how do we engage with them afterwards? And can we measure the engagement to show some kind of quantifiable difference? And so that's what Ogo became. And it's quite a cool job. I love my partners. I really love that they've allowed me to study, do research, teach freelance, um, go and explore this world. So what we bring to clients is new work in this field. So we do a lot of leadership conferences. We design them, the process, and then the actual production as well. Yeah.
This is amazing and so needed, I think, in the corporate world or in the business world.
I really hope so. We've got some wonderful progressive clients. Um, And and then our biggest difficulty is selling this idea from scratch to people who are very used to an event company making events.
Oh yeah.
We do all that, but we bring another layer, and it's interesting. But the clients who get it, and then we're able to kind of create case studies based on what we're doing. So that's quite cool. I just got tired of South Africans telling me at dinner parties or in the Woolworths queue, I've done my research. I'm like, well, have you? I mean, do you know what research is? It's quite hard work. you can't you
Yeah,
can't read two websites that your friend sent you and say you've done your research. Who wrote the website?
exactly.
Where did their facts come from? What
Yeah,
are they like? Is there a sample group? Have you spoken to a number of South Africans across a split demographic? So I'm quite interested in a bit more rigorous research these days before I just add to the narrative. Because again, lots of things are said in the Woolworths queue that become accepted as gospel, and that's damaging because it becomes part of that narrative that guides our society, and it's low level. It's the path of least resistance, and that's not good.
yeah, I totally agree. And I think also the whole event situation where it's almost like an entertaining thing, it's so distant, whereas
Mm.
when you really can change people's perspective or make an impact, that's so much more important.
Exactly. So I'm hoping a bit more substance.
Mm,
Um, And that's not because I must tell everyone else what to do. Just my own life has got to a point where I would like to contribute something with a little bit more substance than the comedy's great. And I'm not saying any other comedian must relook at them. So I'm glad that there are young, wonderful South African comedians working all over the world, and that's amazing. Um, and that's good. But for me personally, this has become something that I would prefer to spend my time on now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I this just proves what I want to prove is that art gives you all these skills, and every form of art is so important for people to pursue because
Mm,
it you don't have to become an artist, you don't have to become a musician, but what music, by studying music, it gives you specific tools and skills and transferable skills
mm.
and like you are drama and comedy that made you the person who you are today and the person who can bring all this to the table.
I hope so. I got a lot of luck, a lot of breaks, a lot of extra stuff as a result of being a comedian. So I feel like if I can put that stuff back in as best I can, I'd be really happy to do that because I think I could. It's easy to waste this kind of stuff,
Yeah,
and I think I did for a long time. Um, but that's given me a bit of urgency now. So I may start another degree in September if everything happens the way it should. And I'll keep studying and teaching and publishing. And yeah, it's
that's
hope. Yeah.
amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
But what are your wishes for the future, apart from the studying? What would you like to see happening to Ogo?
Oh, I think if we can instill cultures in some of our clients where we can help to pay attention to the social fabric of the workplace, a higher quality social fabric, where workplaces become partially a sanctuary, partially a place for robust, healthy conversations, where it's safe to be messy and find each other. Um, I'd be really happy to know that all this work contributes to tools and systems for workplaces that understand inclusivity as a huge advantage as opposed to some kind of irritating obligation, um, which is such a waste, of resources. And it creates a new narrative that like BEE is a certain animal. It's not. It's not perfect. I understand that it's done some damage, also done some good. Um, but inclusivity as well, diversity, equity, all of these things, belonging, inclusion. Because as a social creature, human beings need connection. It doesn't matter what we say.
Absolutely, yeah.
We die younger if we don't connect. We die unhappier. Um, so we starve ourselves of connection if we choose to disconnect. And it's playing out now. There's a lot of mental ill health and stuff. but we don't have to be fragile about it. Like that's the other thing. We don't have to become victims of our own condition. There are things we can do. And so for me, Ogo as a company, if we can help connect more people better, bingo.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, that's what a wonderful wish. Yeah. I'm wishing with you.
Super. Well,
Yeah,
great.
no,
Yeah. Well,
amazing work. Yeah, John, really, this is wonderful work you're doing, and really
thank you.
congratulations with your transition, where you came from, and what you've achieved, and what you still will achieve with this company.
Oh, thanks, Petra. And thanks for reaching out. Like to have a, I'm sorry it took so long to get together, but I'm so glad that we
No,
stuck at it. So thanks for
ex-
not giving up.
no, I never give up.